When I found out Chad had cheated, things between us turned ugly fast. We hurled the cruelest words we could think of at each other, swearing we would never cross paths again for the rest of our lives. But on the day we went to sign the final divorce papers, a yellowed photograph suddenly slipped out from the copy of our marriage license we'd kept all those years. It was Chad at 17. When he learned I'd relapsed into depression, he skipped every competition and stayed in my hospital room for half a month, his arms and face covered in scratches I'd left during my episodes. Later, we took that photo together and promised we would never betray each other. We stared at it in silence for a long time. Then, in a flash of white light, we were pulled back 15 years. A voice echoed in our minds. If you want to go back, you have to relive those 2 weeks all over again. Chapter 1. On the day of the divorce, I wore my most beautiful dress and put on careful makeup. My eyes were swollen from crying. But with a thick layer of foundation, none of it showed. In high heels, chin slightly raised, I walked toward Chad step by step. He seemed impatient from waiting, a small pile of cigarette butts at his feet. When he saw me, he lazily lifted his gaze. His cold eyes swept over me from head to toe, and he let out a short, mocking laugh. Anna, you're not 17 anymore. No amount of makeup is going to hide the crow's feet at the corners of your eyes. Ever since everything fell apart between us, he'd been attacking my age and personality nonstop, as if the cruelest words in the world still weren't enough. Of course, I did the same. Just like now, my eyes landed on the hickey on his neck, bold and unapologetic. So I shot back without hesitation. Not as desperate as you, trying to pretend you're 17 every night. Chloe just had a miscarriage, didn't she? And you're already dragging her into bed again? Aren't you afraid she'll hemorrhage if you keep pushing like that? The moment the words left my mouth, the mockery vanished from Chad's face. Right there outside the courthouse. He grabbed my throat and slammed me against the wall, his teeth clenched. Anna, how do you still have the nerve to bring that up? The cold in his eyes was sharp enough to cut. In his mind, the baby Chloe had been carrying had died because of me. When I first found out she was pregnant, a chill had spread straight to my bones. She had come to me, barely showing, and dropped to her knees in front of my coworkers, crying and begging me to give Chad to her. My mind had gone blank. I shouted at her to get lost. She refused, chased after me, grabbing at my clothes. I tried to shove her away, just to keep her from touching me. Then she tumbled down the steps. Bright red blood spread across her white dress. That day, the woman Chad cherished most cried hysterically after losing the baby. Chad was just like he was now. His hands clamped around my throat as he cursed me over and over, calling me vicious, asking why I wasn't dead yet. The scene overlapped perfectly with the past, but this time, I didn't break down in despair. I raised my hand and slapped him hard across the face. If you ever touch me again, I won't hesitate to blow this whole thing up. I've got nothing left to lose. You, on the other hand, you've got your company hanging by a thread, and Chloe, the girl you care so much about. Believe me, I could walk straight onto her campus and make her life a living hell. Let's see how long her reputation lasts then. When a marriage falls apart, no one knows better how to stab where it hurts most. Chapter 2. I cried. I screamed. I drank myself senseless with friends. She had witnessed everything we'd been through over the years. She said she couldn't understand how two people who had loved each other so deeply could end up like this. I couldn't understand either, how the boy who once swore he would give me the best things in the world had slowly become someone who couldn't stand the sight of me, someone who wished I would just die. That day, I thought about it for a long, long time. I replayed everything from the very beginning of how we met. I was the unwanted child, abandoned by my father and stepmother. He was a child who had nearly been strangled by his own mother at birth. Neither of us belonged anywhere. We were lonely, insecure, carrying wounds no one could see. We met by chance on the street, recognized the same loneliness in each other's eyes, and became friends. After that, he stayed by my side through my treatment, and I stood between him and his mother's hatred. On a freezing New Year's Eve, with lights glowing in every window, we sat on a street corner with nowhere to go, hugged each other, and wished each other a happy new year. From that moment on, our lives became intertwined. We promised we would never be apart. We were always each other's salvation. We met at 16, fell in love without ever needing to say it at 17, married at 23 after graduating from college, and for the first 6 years of marriage, our relationship was steady and happy. Until the summer of the 7th year, Chad was set up by a business rival. Someone slipped something into his drink, bribed the hotel staff, and placed a girl in his room. They were forced into a reckless night neither of them had chosen. Afterward, Chad knelt in front of me, slapping his own face again and again, saying he deserved to die. I cried until I threw up blood. I said I wanted a divorce. He clung to me, crying, begging me over and over not to leave him. We fought for more than half a month, but when we looked back at everything we'd been through, we reconciled. In that entire mess, no one could truly blame the other. In a way, we were all victims. But something had lodged itself in my heart from that moment on. Our relationship could never return to what it once was. We became more and more polite with each other, so polite it felt terrifying. Then I started noticing something was off about Chad. He traveled more and more for work. Strange perfume lingered on him. Our arguments became more frequent. Until, one day, I discovered Chloe. A girl who had also been caught up in that same setup. A girl who, in her own way, was innocent too. Chad felt guilty toward her, so behind my back, he bought her an apartment. Every time he and I sat in silence, unable to say a word to each other, he would turn around and confide in Chloe instead. That bright, passionate girl slowly made her way into his heart, becoming the person he loved most. And then I found out about everything, and the fight started all over again. The guilt in his eyes faded with each argument. First it turned into impatience, then into disgust, and after Chloe lost the baby, it became pure hatred, hatred so deep he wished I were dead. By then, whatever love had existed between us was completely worn away. So I wiped my tears dry, fueled by sheer stubbornness, and smashed the home we once shared into pieces. He called me vicious, so I showed him just how vicious I could be. I stormed into his company, printed out everything he had done over the years, and scattered the pages everywhere. I went to Chloe's school too, picked the middle of class hours, and spread the photos again. Chad was furious enough to want to strangle me. We lashed out at each other with the most poisonous words we could find, again and again, telling each other we deserved to die. In the middle of all that hysteria, I looked at myself in the mirror. My hair was a mess, my face pale, I looked like a ghost. And suddenly, I felt exhausted. So I cleaned myself up from head to toe, and on a bright, breezy day, I asked for a divorce. Chad didn't hesitate. He simply said yes. The memories receded like a tide. Hearing my words now, the disgust in Chad's eyes deepened again. But the hand around my throat slowly loosened. I coughed a couple of times, trying to breathe. He took several deep breaths too, as if forcing himself to calm down, then straightened his clothes. After that, he pulled out all the documents he had prepared in advance. "Did you bring everything?" I nodded and took out the paperwork from my bag. Sitting on top was the copy of our marriage license we'd kept all these years. When we first got married, Chad had treated those 2 copies like treasures. He even secretly brought them to work once, saying he wanted everyone to see them. I laughed and called him childish. He pulled me into a tight embrace, and when he looked up at me, his eyes were filled with nothing but me. "Anna, I want everyone to witness our happiness. But happiness has an expiration date. When you cling to it past its time, it turns into the very blade you use to stab each other in the heart. Just like us." Ridiculous. I gathered my thoughts and was about to walk into the courthouse with the documents. A sudden gust of wind caught it, and the copy of our marriage license slipped from my hands. As I bent down to pick it up, a yellowed photograph slid out from the stack of papers. It was a photo of me and Chad together. It was Chad at 17. When he found out I'd relapsed into depression and had even tried to kill myself, he skipped several major competitions and stayed in the hospital with me for half a month. At the time, my emotions were completely out of control. I didn't just want to die, I lashed out at everyone around me. I was like a madwoman, hysterical every single day. Chad stayed by my side the whole time, his face and arms covered in bloody scratches I'd left on him. I still remember one night when I suddenly woke up. He was sitting there with his chin propped in one hand, smiling as he watched me. I reached out and touched the scratches on his face. He let out a soft sigh and said, "You've got to go easy on this face of mine. It's not that I'm afraid of the pain, I'm just worried it'll scar, and you'll think I'm ugly and stop loving me." Then he added, "If it gets too hard, bite me. Cut me if you have to." Just, don't hurt yourself, okay? We took that photo in the hospital and swore we would never betray each other. If we ever did, we'd deserve whatever punishment came. My chest tightened, as if something had pierced straight through it. Back then, Chad's world revolved entirely around me. His love had been so raw, so intense. But now, I turned to look at him. He was staring down at the photo on the ground. The harshness that usually lingered in his features had softened in the wind. He lifted his head, and our eyes met. In each other's gaze, we saw the same memories, and the same helplessness. We stood there in silence for a long time, until another gust of wind swept past. Dust blew into my eyes. I instinctively raised a hand to rub them. And then, suddenly, everything went white. Chapter 3. Inside the hospital room, Anna sat on the bed, absent-mindedly playing with Chad's fingers. Chad rested his chin on one hand, staring at her without blinking. Blushing under his gaze, Anna muttered softly, "Why do you keep looking at me like that?" At her words, Chad reached out and gently pulled her into his arms, his eyes full of tenderness. "My Anna's the prettiest girl in the world. I could look at you forever and still not get enough." Hearing that, Anna pushed him away a little, then rubbed her face. She asked seriously, "What if one day I get really old? What if I have wrinkles all over my eyes and I'm not pretty at all anymore? Will you still like me?" At once, Chad dropped the smile from his face and answered earnestly. "Anna, I've never loved you for your looks. Even if you're 70 or 80 someday, with gray hair and no teeth left, you'll still be the cutest old lady in my eyes. No younger girl could ever compare." Standing outside the hospital room, Chad and I watched through the glass. That was us at 17. We had returned to 15 years ago, watching the two of us at our most in love play out the same moments all over again. Inside the room, the younger versions of us were still whispering sweet words to each other. I watched 17-year-old Chad slowly lift his hand and brush his fingers over Anna's brows and eyes. He said to her, "Even if you get wrinkles someday, they'll be the cutest wrinkles in the world. My Anna is the cutest girl anywhere, in heaven or on earth." The memories overlapped with the scene in front of us. And somehow, seeing it again with my own eyes hurt far more than just remembering it. If the 17-year-old Chad knew that the 32-year-old version of himself would one day hurl such cruel, ugly words at me, mocking my age, pointing out the lines at the corners of my eyes, I wondered what he would feel. Beside me, Chad stood silently, watching the scene in the hospital room. The boy and girl inside were filled with nothing but love, completely unaware that one day they would tear each other apart like enemies. Chad lowered his gaze, eyes shadowed, lost in thought. Then he looked at me again. His eyes lingered at the corners of mine. This time, there was something new in them, guilt, and unmistakable regret. I parted my lips, about to speak, when a voice suddenly echoed in my mind. Chad's expression sharpened. It seemed he had heard it too. The voice said, "If you want to return to your own time, you must relive those 2 weeks again." "Why?" I demanded. The voice fell silent for a long moment, then repeated itself in the same cold, mechanical tone. "If you want to go back, you must relive them. That is the only way." In the next instant, the lights in the hospital corridor began flickering. By the time my vision cleared again, Chad, who had been standing beside me, was gone. Chapter 4. I lifted my head and looked into the hospital room again. The scene shifted once more. The clock on the wall read 2 in the morning. Anna opened her eyes and looked at a Chad, who had fallen asleep at the bedside. There were several bloody scratches across his cheek, and long, raw marks ran down his arm from shoulder to wrist. Seeing them, Anna's eyes filled with tears. She quietly slipped out from under the blanket, opened a drawer, took out some ointment, and carefully began applying it to his wounds. I had never forgotten this memory. Back then, during my depressive episodes, I had tried to kill myself more than once. My emotions were so unstable that sometimes I even wanted to hurt others. Chad stayed with me the entire time. No matter how badly I clawed at him, leaving his skin torn and bleeding, he only smiled at me. He would say, "Anna, it doesn't hurt at all." That night had been one of my rare moments of clarity. Seeing the marks on his body made my chest ache. So I quietly applied medicine to his wounds. But, I remembered this clearly, he had been too exhausted that night to wake up at all. Which meant that Chad, who was awake now, was the 32-year-old Chad. He slowly opened his eyes, momentarily dazed, then quickly turned his head toward the hospital door. There was a small window in it, and through the glass, our eyes met. He looked at me, lips parting as if he wanted to say something. But before he could speak, the Anna in front of him had already thrown her arms around him. Anna didn't seem to see me at all. She sensed nothing unusual. She held Chad tightly, sniffing as her voice trembled with tears. Chad. I'm sorry. I lost control again. She was crying so hard, and Chad froze at the sudden embrace. His lips pressed into a thin line before he slowly raised a hand and gently patted her back. It's okay. It's okay. Anna. She let go of him, her eyes still wet with tears, yet she tried to smile at him anyway. Then, let me put some medicine on your wounds, okay? Chad nodded silently. Every so often, he looked at the Anna in front of him, and whenever their eyes met, she would beam at him. The love in that smile was impossible to hide. Chad, when we get married someday, do you think we'll be the happiest couple in the world? Anna asked suddenly, her eyes shining with hope for the future. Chad looked into that hopeful gaze, as if something painful from the past had been touched. He gave a quiet nod. We will. We'll be the happiest. He didn't even dare lift his head to look at her. Just from his posture, I could see the guilt weighing on him. But what if we're together for a long, long time, and one day you get tired of me? What if you fall in love with someone else? I'd probably lose my mind, fight with you non-stop. Would you still love me the way you do now? 17-year-old Anna was fragile and sensitive, her dreams and fears for the future placed entirely on 17-year-old Chad. And in the same way, 17-year-old Chad had placed all his hopes in life on Anna. If he were still that boy, he would have said, that day will never come. Because I love you, and I always will. But he wasn't. He lowered his head, guilt overwhelming him. The girl's gaze was too intense, too bright. It was as if it burned him. Even his body trembled slightly. Anna was far too perceptive. That tiny change was enough for her to sense something was off. She wiped the tears from her eyes, gently cupped Chad's face, and spoke with soft certainty. Chad, that day will never come. You love me, and I love you. This love will last a lifetime. I believe in you, and you believe in me, okay? Her gaze was so bright, so full of devotion. Chad's eyes filled with conflicting emotions, memories surging one after another. In the end, he couldn't stop his eyes from reddening. He nodded hard. Yeah, that day will never come. The moment his words fell, I couldn't help letting out a small laugh. His back stiffened slightly. He must have heard me, but he didn't turn around. He just lowered his head, lost in thought. I watched the Anna inside the hospital room and wanted to tell her, silly girl, love is the cruelest joke of all. You won't become the happiest couple in the world. You'll end up screaming at each other, hurling the cruelest words you can think of, confessing your regrets over and over again. My chest tightened, and I couldn't help closing my eyes. But when I opened them again, the scene had changed. I was standing in the small garden behind the hospital, dressed in a patient's gown. And 17-year-old Chad was running toward me, holding a bouquet of baby's breath, my favorite flowers. Chapter 5. Anna, why did you come down here by yourself? Chad ran up to me, his eyes scanning me from head to toe in worry. Only after confirming that I looked calm and unhurt did he finally let out a breath. Then he quickly helped me sit on a nearby bench. If the room feels too stuffy, just tell me. I'll come down and walk with you, okay? His voice was gentle. He reached out and brushed the stray strands of hair from my forehead, then tilted his head and smiled softly at me. I looked at him, at the 17-year-old Chad standing right in front of me. His eyes were clear and burning with warmth, as if the whole world held only me. People are always easily moved by the beauty of youth. If the man standing in front of me were the Chad who had nearly strangled me for Chloe, then no matter how gentle his gaze was now, I wouldn't feel a thing. But he wasn't. He was 17. I just stood there watching him. Maybe the sadness in my eyes was too obvious, because Chad quickly noticed my low mood. He placed the baby's breath into my arms and ruffled my hair like he was comforting a child. I know the hospital's suffocating, and you hate the smell of antiseptic. I asked the doctor, just a few more days and you'll be discharged. When that happens, I'll take you wherever you want to go, okay? Feeling his touch on my head made my chest ache, like 1,000 tiny bites gnawing at my heart. I couldn't bring myself to be cold to the 17-year-old Chad, but the pain of the years that followed surfaced the moment I closed my eyes. So I stood up as if to escape, stepping back quickly. The pebble path beneath my feet was uneven, and distracted as I was, I twisted my ankle. It wasn't serious. Just a little pain. Chad immediately caught me, panic flashing across his face. Does it hurt? Is it bad? This kind of pain was nothing compared to the agony of being choked, unable to breathe. So I shook my head. It doesn't hurt. But Chad pressed his lips together tightly, his eyes reddening, his voice thick. Anna, we promised each other. If you're unhappy, you tell me right away. If you're hurting, you tell me right away. How could twisting your ankle not hurt? You idiot. He muttered under his breath, sounding almost hurt himself. Then he took hold of my foot, slipping off part of my shoe and sock, gently cupping my ankle as he began to massage it. Anna, can you tell me why you're upset? 17-year-old Chad seemed to have endless patience. Even when I stayed silent, he kept trying, over and over, gently coaxing me out of my mood. I lowered my gaze to look at him. He had his head down too, focused on what he was doing. Maybe that was for the best. I didn't really want to see his eyes. Eyes that pure, that burning with devotion. If they were destined to fade someday, then maybe it was better not to look at them from the start. I lifted my head and glanced up at the blue sky and drifting clouds. Then I couldn't help asking, Chad, do you think there'll ever be a day when we get tired of each other? The moment the words left my mouth, the pressure on my ankle tightened. Chad looked up sharply, his eyes locking onto mine, searching for something hidden there. I met his gaze and smiled. Think about it. Life is long. We'll meet all kinds of people. Maybe one day you'll think some other girl is younger, prettier, and you'll see me as crazy, and you won't like me anymore. That won't happen. His answer came immediately. He bent slightly, making sure his eyes were level with mine, his gaze steady and unwavering. I love you. I decided a long time ago I'd love you for the rest of my life. Sweet words always sound beautiful. If I were still 17, I would have cried, believing completely in this moment of happiness. But I had already lived through the wreckage that came afterward. I mean, if it really did happen someday. If you fell for another girl. Even had a child with her. If you started to hate me, said you wished I would just die. Chad, if that day really came, what then? He must have heard the seriousness in my voice, because he tightened his grip on my hand, his expression turning solemn. As he moved, his sleeve shifted slightly, revealing the scar on his arm. It was from last winter. My stepmother had tried to set me up with a relative of hers, someone mentally unstable. When I refused, she cried to my father. That day, he beat me badly. Chad had come by to wish me a happy holiday. When he heard me crying, he rushed in. My father was furious, shouting that he'd whip me to death for being shameless. Chad threw himself in front of me. His back took the blows, and his arms too, so many scars left behind. Seeing me fall silent, he spoke again. If the future Chad ever treats you that badly, then beat the hell out of him. No matter how much he regrets it, no matter how he tries to use your past together to guilt you into forgiving him, don't. He won't deserve it. Do you understand? Chad said it with such seriousness that his eyes started to well up. I reached out and wiped the tears from the corners of his eyes. Then I forced a small smile. But, what if I can't beat him? Chad fell quiet for a moment, his voice rough when he spoke again. Would he hit you? I nodded. Yeah. He'd grab me by the throat and curse at me, asking why I wasn't dead yet. The moment the words left my mouth, Chad pulled me into a tight embrace. He stayed silent for a long, long time, so long that I could feel dampness spreading through the fabric at my shoulder. I didn't move. I just let him hold me. I don't know how much time passed before he finally spoke. Then he's a monster. He deserves to burn in hell. A gust of wind blew past, sand stinging my eyes. I looked up, and saw 32-year-old Chad standing not far away, emotions churning in his gaze. Chapter 6. Over the next few days, the scenes kept shifting. Sometimes I would be inside them, other times, in the blink of an eye, Chad would be standing in front of Anna. The same Chad who had once screamed at me, who had nearly lost control in rage. In front of Anna, he was flawless in his gentleness. He smiled softly at her, held her tightly when she broke down, let her bite into his arm until it bled. And he would still say, Anna, it doesn't hurt. I just watched them quietly. But at moments like that, Chad never once dared to turn around and look at me. Maybe he felt he had no right to. As for me, sometimes I would meet 17-year-old Chad again. Every time he looked at me, his eyes were filled with blazing love. We would sit together on the hospital lawn, counting the scattered stars in the sky. He would spend the prize money he'd saved from competitions to buy me gifts, just to make me smile. Even if it meant that for a long time afterward, he could only afford the cheapest cafeteria buns and free soup, he never complained. 17-year-old Chad was truly, genuinely good. And days like those felt stolen, so they passed all too quickly. Half a month slipped by in the blink of an eye. The scenes kept changing, and Chad and I finally entered a memory together for the first time. It was when I was almost fully recovered. Chad and I walked downstairs together for a stroll. It was the same setting as before, but we could no longer do the things we once did. We walked in silence, retracing the path from memory, step by step. Maybe the silence grew too heavy. In the end, he couldn't hold back and spoke first. "Anna. I'm sorry." The sudden apology caught me off guard. I stopped in my tracks and looked up at him. "You don't have to say things like that just because you've seen how much 17-year-old Anna loved you. It sounds hollow." "Because I wasn't 17 anymore." Chad shook his head. The man who had once glared at me with cold hostility now seemed much softer. His expression was complicated, tangled with hesitation, with guilt. I understood that feeling all too well. Memories preserved at a distance can stay beautiful forever. But when you're forced to relive them like this, to stand inside them again, they cut straight into your heart. He had seen the way his 17-year-old self loved, purely, fiercely. He remembered the promises he'd made, the vows never to betray, the love he'd sworn would never change. Every moment he'd slowly forgotten over the years now returned, one by one. And being inside those scenes made them feel like a dull, invisible blade, slowly sinking into his chest, painful, unbearable, and impossible to pull out. "Anna. I don't even know why. Why we ended up like this." He closed his eyes, unable to hold it back. We had been through too much over the years. We had seen how cruel people could be, paid painful prices for the lessons we learned, and in the process, lost every trace of the innocence and naivety we once had. So he wouldn't react the way 17-year-old Chad would, wouldn't redden his eyes so easily. All that remained now was a complicated gaze, and words he couldn't bring himself to say. So I told him, because people change. Because you can't get back the heart you once had. There are too many temptations in this world. You can't stay as certain and steadfast as you were at 17. I paused, and when his eyes lifted to meet mine, I held his gaze. "Chad, admit it. The man you are now is a terrible person." At my words, his expression tightened. He reached out as if to grab my arm. But I stepped away first. We were speaking with a hatred that didn't belong to this time, forgetting that in this moment, in this version of the world, something important was about to happen to Chad. "And Anna." In the next instant, a disheveled woman rushed toward us, a knife clutched in her hand. If we were still the people we used to be, if memory and reality overlapped perfectly. Then the moment I saw her coming, I would have shoved Chad aside without thinking. The blade would have slid from my neck downward, leaving a scar across my back that would never fade. Blood would have soaked the blue hospital gown I was wearing. Chad would have held me tightly, eyes full of fear and panic, crying uncontrollably. But the Chad standing in front of me now wasn't that boy whose world had once been only me. So I just stood there. I watched his eyes narrow at the sudden noise, watched the instinctive way he tried to dodge. But he was still a fraction too slow. That knife, maybe it had to draw someone's blood before it could be satisfied. The long, deep scar fell across Chad's back this time. I could feel the heat of his blood splattering against my face, hear the woman screaming hysterically. "Chad. Why aren't you dead yet?" Chapter 7. Even though this was a memory, the wound Chad suffered was real. The moment the blade tore through his skin, there was only a bone-deep cold. But he didn't feel fear. The first thing that flashed through his mind was Anna. Chad would probably never forget, back in that summer years ago, when his mother, completely out of her mind, escaped from the psychiatric hospital with a knife and tried to kill him. Everyone else was too terrified, scrambling to get away. Only Anna had stepped forward without hesitation, shielding him and taking the knife for him without a single complaint. Back then, the girl he loved lay bleeding in his arms, and the pain in his chest had nearly suffocated him. And yet, even in that agony, Anna had still sensed his fear. She forced out a weak smile and told him, "Chad. I don't feel any pain at all." Even though she was the kind of girl who would tear up from a simple fall, from the smallest scrape. With a wound that deep across her back, how could it not have hurt? Chad suddenly felt as if something were tightening around his heart, making it hard to breathe. He wanted desperately to hold on to something. But the Anna who once would have taken that blade for him now stood there, her face calm, unreadable. The pressure in his chest only grew heavier. Because he remembered, during one of their worst fights, he had lashed out and called the scar on her back ugly. He had even deliberately ignored the flash of pain in her eyes. And now, as the memory replayed before him, it felt like his heart was dying inside his chest. Chad finally couldn't hold back his tears of regret. Anna, back then, you must have been in so much pain. Anna heard him and laughed. A sharp, mocking laugh. It turns out, it wasn't worth it. Just that single sentence shattered the man who had survived countless battles in the business world. In a daze, he remembered another scene. Outside the operating room, he had been on his knees in the hallway, sobbing uncontrollably, swearing to himself that he would never betray Anna for the rest of his life. So how had the 32-year-old version of him forgotten that vow? Chapter 8. This time, the scene lasted a long while. Chad was rushed into the emergency room. His mother was restrained and sent back to the psychiatric hospital next door. When they were young, love had felt absolute. But as time passed and life wore on, that woman had been betrayed by the man she loved, abandoned and broken. For someone who had once believed love was everything, the pain was unbearable. So when she found herself pregnant, she ignored everyone's pleas and chose to give birth. Not out of love, but out of hatred. She hated that man. And she hated the child. From the moment he was born, the torment never stopped. They weren't mother and son. They were enemies bound by blood. Hatred consumed her, until she lost her mind completely. Chad loved this last remaining family member with everything he had, but he didn't dare get close. He had never once called her a mom, because she wouldn't allow it. He had cried in my arms before, asking if maybe he should never have been born at all. I pulled him into my arms and sang the lullabies my mother used to sing to me when I was little, trying to calm him. And now, the wheel of fate had turned back again. Sometimes I even wondered if this was something passed down through blood, just as cruel, just as inescapable. I couldn't figure it out, and I didn't want to see Chad. So I lay down on the bed and fell asleep. When I woke up, the scene had changed again. This time, Chad and I were only observers. Inside the hospital room was still the moment when I had been gravely injured after taking the knife for him. We stood outside the door. Chad's face was pale, and in this memory, every sensation was heightened, so the pain from that wound was 10 times worse than what I had felt back then. He looked at me, emotions surging in his eyes, as if he wanted to say something. I just stood there, quietly watching him. He suddenly lowered his gaze, and a tear fell without warning, landing on the back of my hand. I'm sorry, Anna. I looked at that tear and suddenly found it unbearably ironic. When we were young, we were just like his mother, we believed love mattered more than anything else. We thought we would never repeat the mistakes of the generation before us. And yet we ended up screaming at each other, hurling the cruelest words we could, forgetting all the love we once had, wishing each other dead. Love brings sorrow. Love brings fear. Free from love, there is neither sorrow nor fear. Inside the hospital room, Chad and Anna stood in front of the camera and took that photo. In the next instant, the world collapsed before our eyes. Chapter 9. It felt like waking from a dream. When I opened my eyes, everything looked as if nothing had changed. We were still standing outside the courthouse. The only difference, the yellowed photograph that had fallen to the ground was gone. There had been 2 copies of that photo. The one that belonged to me was probably gone forever. I withdrew my gaze. I didn't bare my claws the way I used to, trying desperately to protect myself from getting hurt. I looked at him calmly and said, "Let's go sign the papers." Chad slowly lifted his head. The coldness in his eyes had disappeared completely. Something else surged there, something hard to name. He pressed his lips together, as if he wanted to say something, but when the words reached his mouth, he fell silent. And then something broke that silence. The phone in Chad's hand lit up, and Chloe's ringtone shattered the stillness. Maybe it was a reminder. Maybe it was meant as a warning. But Chad didn't pick up. He acted as if he hadn't heard the phone at all, his eyes locked on me, still struggling to speak. So I repeated it patiently. "Chad, let's go sign the papers." The moment the words fell, his whole body trembled. He staggered backward in panic, the documents in his hand scattering across the ground. "Anna." I was wrong. He slowly crouched down, wrapping his arms tightly around himself. I looked down at him, and saw a scar across his back, the same as the one that had once been on mine. I reached up and touched my own back. A strange realization hit me. The scar that should have been there was gone. So the things we said and did inside those memories could actually change reality. If I had known that earlier, I would have told 17-year-old Anna not to give her whole heart to Chad. But I knew it would have been useless. Because 17-year-old Anna loved Chad with everything she had. She was stubborn. The kind who would keep going until she hit a wall and shattered. So this ending, what we had become, was never something that could be undone. I reached out and lightly patted Chad on the head. I don't accept your apology. And I have no intention of staying tangled up with you anymore. If your conscience is finally catching up to you, if you really think you've wronged me all these years, then the best thing you can do is divorce me. Now. Separation was the best ending we could have. But hearing that, Chad suddenly stood up. He looked at me and shook his head. No, Anna. You loved me so much. How could you really go through with divorcing me? I laughed. A bare, merciless laugh. Because the man you are now isn't worth my love. Not even a little. Chapter 10. Chad ran. You could even say he fled. The documents lay scattered across the ground. As I picked them up one by one, a young couple who had just gotten their marriage license walked over. Your husband looks like he really regrets it. Maybe you could give him another chance? I looked at the girl. Her face was glowing with happiness. I knew she meant well. She probably thought we were divorcing over something small. So I told her, the first time he cheated, it was an accident. I forgave him. But instead of remorse, all I got was worse betrayal. He kept another woman, got her pregnant, even grabbed me by the throat and asked why I wasn't dead yet. I regret ever giving him a second chance. And I will never give him a third. The girl froze for a moment, then guilt flooded her expression. I'm sorry. I didn't know that was the reason. I gave her a dismissive smile, then turned and walked away. I had no idea where Chad had gone. He wasn't answering calls. He wasn't replying to messages. It was like he had vanished into thin air. When Chloe came to see me, I was with a friend, talking about what I should do next. The moment she walked in, her eyes red, she started screaming hysterically at me. Do you have any shame at all? Chad doesn't even like you anymore. All he sees now is me. He said he wants to be with me for the rest of his life, do you hear me? For life. So why won't you divorce him? Why do you keep clinging to him? We're the ones in love. Why do you insist on forcing yourself between us? Listening to her accusations, I couldn't help but laugh. For life? Please. I took a deep breath and opened a live stream on my phone. I used to post short videos online all the time. At first it was just to pass the time, but later the account grew. I gained followers, and sometimes I'd go live to chat with them. There were always quite a few people watching. I turned the camera toward Chloe. She thought I was just recording and gave me a contemptuous smile. Don't think filming this is going to help you later, showing it to Chad and trying to make me look like some evil woman. Let me tell you something. Chad already said he loves everything about me. The good and the bad. So what if I get emotional? He told me this version of me, alive, passionate, is 1,000 times more interesting than someone as lifeless as you. As she spoke, my eyes flicked to the live stream screen. The viewer count was rising at a terrifying pace. Maybe people just loved drama. The numbers kept climbing. So this is your reason for being the other woman? My voice was calm. Chloe flinched at the word, glaring at me. So what if I am? Haven't you heard? The one who isn't loved is the real outsider. Anna, you're already in your 30s. I haven't even graduated college yet. I'm young, I'm pretty, I'm passionate, I know how to keep a man interested. How could you ever compare? If you had any self-respect at all, you'd leave on your own instead of constantly sabotaging my relationship with Chad. They say not just anyone has the nerve to be the other woman. In that moment, I finally understood what that meant. To be that shameless, you needed an incredibly strong heart. So I grabbed Chloe by the hair. She screamed as I dragged her in front of me, then flipped the camera so she could see the live stream screen for herself. I watched her expression shift, from smug to terrified. If you're so proud of being the other woman, you shouldn't mind saying hello to everyone, right? The next second, Chloe let out a piercing scream right next to my ear. Anna, you're going to die for this. She lunged, trying to knock my phone out of my hand. My friend rushed over to help hold her back. The three of us struggled together, everything turning into chaos. Stop it. A furious shout came from the doorway, and the three of us froze. Chloe put on the most pitiful expression imaginable and threw herself straight into Chad's arms. Chad, where have you been these past few days? Do you have any idea how badly Anna's been bullying me while you were gone? Her voice trembled with tears, her face streaked as if she'd suffered some terrible injustice. I didn't say a word. I simply took the documents he had dropped earlier out of my bag. Now that you're here, let's finish what we started. Chad pushed Chloe aside and walked toward me. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a yellowed photograph, his voice laced with quiet nostalgia. This photo, it's the one that belonged to me. I locked it in a metal box and left it at a little shop in the city where we took our first trip together. I used to think that one day, when we returned there, I'd take it out and we'd look back on everything. I thought it would be a beautiful memory. So the reason you disappeared these past few days was to go find this photo? He nodded, a bitter smile tugging at his lips. Anna, I was a fool. I loved you so much I wanted to give you the best of everything in the world. If that accident hadn't happened, nothing between us would have changed. Back then, I just felt dirty. I didn't dare touch you. I was afraid of seeing the pain in your eyes, so I ran from it. Chloe's smile reminded me of how you used to be when you were younger. I kept chasing that memory, and one wrong step led to another. I forgot who I was supposed to spend my life with. But now I understand. The vow I made in that hospital hallway all those years ago, it was real. I meant every word. And I want to keep it this time. Will you give me another chance? As he spoke, I reached out and took the photo. In it, we were smiling freely. Our eyes filled with hope for the future, bright and unguarded. For some reason, the photograph suddenly felt warm in my hands. I turned it over. A line of black words slowly appeared. If you can't love her for the rest of your life, then let her go before you hurt her again. And after that, you should disappear, because you broke your promise and became just like your father. Chad, age 17. Chapter 11. Because of those words, Chad finally let go and agreed to the divorce. According to our original agreement, we were supposed to split the assets evenly. But this time, Chad revised the terms. He said he wanted to leave everything to me. I didn't refuse. We finalized the divorce quickly, and all the assets were transferred into my name. I sold the house right away. Then I left, moving to a place where the weather stayed warm and spring-like year-round, planning to settle there. To start my life over. Chad changed phone numbers again and again, sending me message after message, reliving pieces of our past. It was as if he had trapped himself in that dream, convinced he was still the 17-year-old boy. I never replied. I blocked him over, and eventually changed my number altogether. After that, my world finally fell silent. We had too many mutual friends, so I still heard about him now and then. Chad had given me everything he owned. He was left with nothing. Chloe fought with him, cried, begged him to take the money back. Chad told her he wanted to break up. She refused, screaming and causing a scene, but that live stream of mine had drawn too many viewers. The other woman trying to destroy someone else's marriage. And the story of Chad and me from when we were young, somehow spreading everywhere. People ate it up. A love story turned tragedy. The backlash online exploded like a volcano. Chloe was forced to drop out of school. People recognized her everywhere she went. Many of them had been through what I had, people who despised women who broke up marriages. She had nowhere left to run. She was pushed to the brink of collapse. Even her parents publicly condemned her, cut her off completely. She lost her family. Chad cut ties with her too. She couldn't show her face anywhere. As for Chad, things weren't any better for him. His personal details were all over the internet. Even his father's past affairs were dragged into the open. Relentless condemnation. Endless insults. Chad lost his job. He drifted through his days in a daze. Then his mother escaped from the psychiatric hospital again. She grabbed that same knife and stabbed him when he least expected it. Just like your father, she screamed. You deserve to go to hell. But he didn't die. His body was left severely damaged. He lived in constant pain, wasting away day by day. Maybe it wouldn't be long before the pain killed him. A friend asked me if I wanted to see him one last time, now that I knew how bad things had become. It might be the last chance. I refused. Chapter 12. As you sow, so shall you reap. At this point, my love life is a public service announcement. Free of charge.